talk to me about how you prioritize self-care in your life and what that looks like, because you have to have some kind of a plan in place to remain healthy and energized to do this work.
Right. Well, for me, faith matters. It makes such a difference in my everyday and who I am and what, every single day I wake up at 4 a.m. and I make sure to meditate, pray, and prepare myself for the challenges of the day and the obstacles. So I think that's really important. It helps me. And, something that I recently started is I got myself a new treadmill. And as I'm on that treadmill, I thought, how am I going to, sometimes it's easy to get discouraged from doing that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
As I'm walking or doing my steps, I'm also praying the rosary. I was raised a Catholic, although my mother, her father was a Spanish Jew.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So I've had a little bit of variety in my upbringing, but my Catholicism, my faith, this is not even about religion. It's about my faith. And I think that's what helps me to be a change agent and really press forward.
Yeah. I love that word, change agent. That is you in a nutshell. I love that. All right. Talk to me about confidently setting boundaries, because you get pulled in a lot of different directions by a lot of different people, and people that don't always have, let's just call it agendas. There's agendas. So how do you set boundaries within that and have clarity on what the right things are to say yes and no to?
I think first, I know what some of the needs are or some of the deficiency are in my community. And so because of that, it helps me to stay focused on fulfilling those needs or advocating for those groups. And so I often, I go into these things, and I know people don't always value you. We all know that.
Sure.
And it's unfortunate, but I've had to interject myself into conversations that, folks that look like me have been excluded.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy. It's not easy because people don't always like when you're, giving your 2 cents or being frank about subjects.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about ethnicity and race, people don't like it, or holding people accountable. Yeah. And but I feel like what I do is important, and I don't need everybody in the community to know what I'm doing. I have to navigate through all that silently sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's important work, because sometimes, speaking in the ear of someone or using platforms that not everybody gets a chance to voice issues, I think it's very, very important.
Talk to me about taking care of your emotional health as well as your physical health and how those tie together. Because again, like we talked about earlier, that's a very important piece for you, because you are in places that can really take a toll on both of those things. So how do you work that in?
Well, first I have to tell you that I'm an avid gardener. I garden year round.
Okay.
So I just got through my summer. Now I'm going into my fall and winter gardening and growing vegetables. And it's so meditative. That's for me is so important. And, the time that I spend with my husband and daughter are so, so valuable. My daughter doesn't live in Lubbock, but when she comes to Lubbock, I take full advantage of that. We spend a lot of time outside in our backyard. And I even had one of my neighbors built an outdoor fireplace for me. So as I'm meditating and praying, I turn on my fireplace. Even in the summer, after he built it, I was turning on the fire just because it adds to that momentum of living.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, this is kind of crazy, but because we live in such a loud world, I love silence. Silence helps me to sustain my mental health. As I grow older, I've also grown in the portion of also recognizing that sometimes being silent and not always giving my views on certain subjects is also very important to my mental wellness and my health, because, I think you got to choose your battles carefully.
Yeah.
But, I pray that when people hear me speak, they know that I'm speaking for a reason and not just to be heard.
Right. But, not just making noise. There's purpose behind it.
Exactly. There's purpose. And I want to create dialogue that sometimes people don't realize, but, I have to do it pretty frequently.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you speak to something so important, that taking the time to quiet your mind and just collect yourself and calm everything so that you can hear the new things or the fresh things, or even like the things that you've missed. I know that's how it works for me. If I just sit down and quiet, then all of a sudden those things that I haven't had a chance to process,
right,
all of a sudden I've made room for that. And
or it even gives you clarity.
Exactly.
A lot of clarity. So
absolutely.
Although my husband is very loud, he's very excited about life. And about 8:30 p.m., I'm like, I'm hearing this and I want to hear.
We are winding down.
Yep. And he's still going. And I'm like, he doesn't wake up at 4 a.m. But I mean, I get so much done at that time because I have silence and I have clarity.
Yeah.
And it gets my creative juices flowing. And unfortunately, I get a lot of ideas and I'm like, no more projects.
I've had enough. The boundary there. No more right now. I think too, another thing that you've spoke to is you get your sleep. Like you are disciplined. You are in bed at 9:30 because you know that you've got to have the energy for the day. And we cannot underestimate the power of a good night's sleep.
Exactly. And this is crazy, but sleep is so essential for a brain and just for well-being. So I take a lot of priority in that. And unfortunately, it's crazy, but I think with the day turning darker earlier,
sure,
my body clock has started modifying. So I've been waking up at 3:30, 45. I'm like, no, not yet.
Not yet.
It's not time for that yet. But, sometimes I'll just lay in bed and just wait and let my thoughts start going on their own. And, at one time I said, okay, I'm going to dedicate my first minute to prayer. And it seems so easy, but then life kind of just takes over.
Yeah.
And so I realized that wasn't possible, but I get that sleep and it's so important and it just makes me feel really good. And so I'm ready for the day. And unfortunately, like I told you, opposites attract. My husband is completely opposite of me and he is not a morning person. And I always tell him, let's go walking, let's go eat breakfast, let's go have coffee. Or I finally just stopped waiting for him or anybody else. I'm like, it's got to be about Christy.
Yeah.
And so,
and that's okay because you need that time too.
Okay. Yeah. So I go out there and like I said, I've been utilizing my fireplace a lot. And then I have this amazing wind chime that I have a very tall pine tree in my backyard that I've got to show it to you one day, but it's so beautiful. It has ripples. It's one of the tallest trees in Lubbock.
I was going to say to have a pine tree in your yard in Lubbock. Oh,
yes. And the best part is we have about a 4.5 foot wind chime. Has the perfect sound. So as the wind is blowing through that tree and I mean, I just love the mornings. And the funny thing is I always tell my husband, I wake the birds. They don't wake me.
I'm not waiting for the rooster.
So, but I just love to, enjoy the sky in the morning, the fresh country breeze, the sound of the birds and the city waking up.
Yeah. Oh, I like that
sound. It really is a great sound. And then when it gets too loud, I go back in.
Well, I love that though. And I love this. I have a great memory as a kid. My grandma had wind chimes and just that peaceful sound of faintness, but just kind of blowing through. I love that. I always, whenever somebody says wind chimes, that comes back to me. It's always such a good memory. But I think to just having that time to yourself. And I understand, Libby, we're the opposite. I'm the non-morning person and Brady's the morning person. And so, So I empathize with Frank completely, and Brady, you would be great friends. All right.
Who wants to go have breakfast or drink?
I will let him know. I will let him know. How can we support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically? Because you do this really well. You believe what you believe, and you are not naive to what you're up against.
Oh no!
Not only as a Hispanic woman, but as a woman. Period. Yes. And but you have your character traits drive you. Your faith drives you. So how do you not only have that, but how do we support all women in getting into those spaces? And because women are notorious for saying sorry, for not making room for that. I mean, you gave me such a great analogy. We were talking yesterday about how you don't have to open up for a space for me at the table. I'll start my own table and invite people.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. And I carry a chair all the time.
I love that. So talk about that though, and how you got there and what your journey's been like in getting there.
I used to work for City Hall. And during that time, I worked for a woman named Deborah Forte. She was the assistant city manager. And one day she gave me a book, and it's called Verbal Judo. Oh, and I thought that just the title itself and the fact that she was giving me that was very interesting. But sadly, she created a space at, the breast cancer advocacy organization for me, because she saw that it was all white women. Yeah. And so she created that little spot for me. Unfortunately, I would have to have conversations that aren't always welcomed. And but from all of this, I also learned that we've got to stop saying sorry, like you said. Yeah. I can't apologize for being passionate and speaking my convictions. Yeah. I mean, everybody has a purpose, and I realized what my purpose was at a very young age. And I decided, I can't apologize. And I always talk to young ladies, especially when I hear them saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I'm like, what are you sorry about?
Exactly.
This is what you have to do. And it's not going to be popular. I know a lot of the topics that we discuss. And I had a conversation with an individual, a man in a very high profile position in athletics yesterday. And I was very blunt, but not in a way. Everything is a teachable and it's a learning. And sometimes, they have to hear this. And, he said, and I told him, look, I'm going to be frank when I tell you this. I said, I'm doing this because I'm opening that door, but I also am a consultant. So I'm not going to be doing this for free too much longer. So
knowing your value too.
Exactly.
And not apologizing for it.
And not apologize because, and plus sometimes people of color, especially women of color, tend to get put in these positions where we've got to offer all the information, but they don't want to, they don't
compensate you for it.
Exactly. And there's only so much that I can do where I'm like, wait a minute, I can't just give you all my energy and all of my experience and all of my data for your benefit. At one point or another, you have to pay, and I can't apologize for that.
Absolutely. Nor should you, and nor should anybody else. I love all of that. And the example you are for other women, and especially in young women coming up, because that is such an issue. And it's not really an elephant in our room, but the truth is, that would not happen to a white man. I mean, exactly. He would demand pay, and he would get it, and no one would ask questions.
Well, two things I have to tell you that I think are important, and I created as a result of these two experiences. I wrote a grant to FEMA for the city of Lubbock, and I didn't get the credit. The person in charge of that department got the credit. And then when we went to go for training and whatnot, I realized very soon when I had all the information and I saw how men sat. So I ended up being on the outside of that box.
Wow.
And I learned very quickly, arrive 30 minutes early, always, always. You watch where the key person is going to sit, and then you sit, at an angle to that person where, you're going to be seen, you're going to be heard.
You're in their line of vision.
Right. Exactly. And then the other thing was I collect data. I'm always, working at City Hall. I wanted to show case studies and show, you don't believe me? Well, here it is.
Here it is. Yeah.
One day, and, with all due respect to this individual, I had this collection, a folder with a lot of important articles and case studies. And he said, "Where's that book that you have with all that information about Hispanics?" And I said, "Why?" And he says, "Well, I need it for my meeting." And I thought, wow, he took all of my efforts and made it his. And and that happens too often, where women aren't being given the credit or being given the platform to share beyond just those case studies. Yeah. We also need to be the spokespersons of those topics so that you can understand, because, later on, I remember telling him, because there's so much, and without really revealing who he is or anything, but I told him how, what he did was very hurtful, but at the same time, it made me that much more stronger and more assured of what I needed to do, because that's the kind of stuff that I always have dealt with. And, and I decided no more of that. So I ended up leaving City Hall and ended up taking a job in Washington, D.C. that was a great experience. So it was worth going through that, because it opened my eyes to a lot of other things. Yeah.
And it was a learning opportunity. But I think and one last thing on that, I think it's very interesting, and this happens in the culture all the time. Mm-hmm. He, because of how our culture is designed, thought nothing of taking that information. And so many times women think nothing of handing it over. That's just how things work. And they don't stop and wait a minute. Yeah. And so thank you so much for your insight on that. I love that. The importance of setting and coming back to your why in everything you do, because you are so driven by who you are and your why.
Well, I think it's important to be knowledgeable of who you are. And, I used to sit on a lot of boards and committees and whatnot. And then one day I was at a literacy committee or board meeting, and, it was led by a woman, unfortunately. And I remember that I had a lot to offer. And I remember saying something like, it's for some reason, she just seemed really threatened by me all the time. And I remember saying, I texted someone, they were looking for stuff for a big fundraiser and what they wanted. And I texted it, my contact, and said, sure, we'll give you this, whatever you want. And then I announced it, and she ignored me. And there was two men sitting next to me, and they're like, did you not hear what Christy said? And she ignored them too, because she didn't want to hear that Christy had just saved the day, but so it made me realize that in order for people to value me, I also have to value my time and my expertise and my contributions. And so I also have to be more selective of what I'm giving of myself, because somebody told me just this morning, I had a conversation with a friend at 6 a.m., which she's like, why are you texting me at 6 a.m.? But, I forget sometimes that the world doesn't wake up when Christy does. But she said, you do so much work, and I don't know how you do it. Sometimes I don't know why you do it, but I told her, you know what? It's my passion, and I love it. I love what I do. And at one point or another, I'm going to have a grandbaby, God willing, one day, and then I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to give it while you got time to give it.
Give it while I can, because, and I tell my daughter, hurry, but now she's on the PhD track. So,
oh, geez. You got more time. You just bought yourself 4 to 5 years.
She works on a national level. So she's a very busy young woman, but she's, here's the other thing, that because of my experiences, I've been able to teach my daughter And so my daughter has risen. She's the highest ranking Hispanic woman in her company.
Wow.
And she's only 30 years old, and she's working on a national level. But I listen to her sometime and I'm like, dang, I feel like I had a little bit to do with that.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's about modeling that. I mean, we have to model we can't just talk about doing these things, and we have to model it. We have to live it so that they will take that, because that's what they'll remember.
Yeah, we have to mentor. We have to mentor, and we have to be mentored.
Yeah.
When we do that kind of stuff, I think it creates the waves continue. And so,
absolutely. Well, creating that space where women are more for women, because you brought up a great point earlier about the woman that was threatened. Yes. I think so many times women fight the system, and they fight so hard to get in the chair that when they get there, they see everybody as the threat rather than trying to lift other women up and bring them with them. And I think we as women have to get to a space where we're inviting other people to be in the room with us when we get the opportunity, rather than being threatened by every other one that comes in the room.
Yes. And, I worked with another woman that she was a councilwoman, and she was never threatened by me. And because of that, we were able to achieve so much.
Yes.
And she was always open to my insight, and she never took my credit or took my thunder. She made it a point, but it didn't matter about that.
Right. It wasn't about who was getting credit. It was about what are we going to do to make,
what are we achieving? And, how are we making an impact because of this joint commitment to the issue?
Yeah.
So
collaboration is so much more powerful.
Oh, I love, and I think we talked about the word collaboration. It's such an important word that we have to learn to do in everything that we do, and with every group that we deal with, and it's an opportunity word. And I love that collaboration, such a key word in life.
It is. And it's how we really make real standing change. I mean, you can make your little marks in these silos, but if you really want to change the narrative, there's got to be collaboration. As I've worked in more nonprofit spaces over the last 6 years, I'm like, this is a necessity. You don't move big things, and it doesn't have to be, it starts at the community level. And so I think that's just so key. Living out of your own expectations versus others' expectations, because I think a lot of times we as women struggle with all the voices around us kind of defining us and deciding who we're supposed to be in the world, instead of living out of our own expectations that were planted in us and how we are to be. So talk to me about that.
Well, the first thing I'll tell you, you mentioned that I love to travel. Mm-hmm. And what I found sometimes about folks in the Hispanic community or in this community, not everybody, but a large number of people, every time I'd say, well, I'm going to China, I'm going to Kazakhstan, I'm going to Turkey, I'm going to wherever. Mm-hmm. And that I guarantee if I had $1 for every time I heard this, aren't you scared? And I thought, man, but people tend to want to limit us.
Yeah.
And, I'm just that type of person that I learned from that, mm-hmm. And once you travel to the first country, you get the travel bug, and then it just keeps on the next challenge. And, I was talking to an individual who, she's got a PhD, she's done all these things, and she's never traveled out of the country.
Wow.
And I told her, I'm up to my third passport. I said, you've got to change that, because she asked me to speak to her students. And that was one of the things that I shared with these students is make it a point to study abroad, go see the world.
Yep.
And I said, you'll learn so much about yourself and about something different than your comfort zone. And I think that is so critical in, leaving and creating expectations, is because you surpass what other people believe that you're capable of. And even when I went to work in DC, I remember, hearing comments and whatnot. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. But I also recognized, because I had, I had a child. My daughter was 13 years old. And, one day I left, because I had to leave early to catch a train, work all day. And then I had events in the evening. So I had to to leave or come home late, and I didn't get to see my daughter. But one day I had this very surreal experience, and I thought, man, I didn't get to talk to her this morning. I didn't get to say goodnight. And then soon realized I had to, come back to this community. I already had a home here, and I thought, yeah, I got the experience, but I cannot sacrifice that time with my daughter. My role in her life is too important.
Yeah.
And so I remember telling someone, I had to choose between my career and my family. And, sorry, family. No, I was just kidding. Yeah. but when I moved back to Lubbock, I remember saying, dang, God, you are a comedian to bring me back to this community.
Of all the places.
But, I decided you got to make your mark where, or what they say, bloom where you grow.
Yeah.
And I had to do that. And it's never been easy. I want to love everything about Lubbock, but I don't. I'm going to be honest, because sometimes it's crazy to me how, people still are so naive or pretend to be naive.
Yeah.
The fact that when we're talking about diversity, it doesn't just mean black and white.
Yeah.
It needs to make sure, especially when in a community like this, that almost 38% of the population is Hispanic.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're not represented, or, we're not included in the conversations. It's a disappointment. And to me, that you can't play stupid all the time. You've got
and not wanting to be made uncomfortable. You and I've talked about that before. People don't want to be uncomfortable, and people get a very narrow vision of what diversity and inclusion includes. Yes. And I will say it's not only ethnicities, it's ages, it's, LGBTQIA communities. There's so much more. It's ideas. It's the way you think. It's your faith. There's so many pieces to diversity and inclusion, and so many places are just trying to check boxes and fill a stat line. And when you start to talk to them about that, they get uncomfortable, but it's by getting uncomfortable and going back to my word, collaborative, that we actually make spaces, and you don't allow other voices to keep you from doing that. You understand that you are in a place, in a position where you're going to do everything you can with all your energy to be a change agent.
Yes.
In this space.
Well, I remember being invited to serve on a bank board by an individual who had lived in a diverse community. He was a, white male, mm-hmm. and he wasn't threatened by diversity. He was comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And he said, I really would like your insight, your expertise, your connection to the community. I really want you to serve on our bank board. And I was like, first I was flattered. And once I got on there, it was all white male. And I saw why, but I was very clear, and I told everyone, I'm not here to be the token.
Right.
I'll say that. And, sometimes when you say that kind of stuff to a group, it makes them feel uncomfortable. But they need to hear those types of comments, because, I've got, when we talked about expectations, I have to let them know my expectations.
Yeah.
I bring something that you may not. And, it's been a great experience. Unfortunately, the bank just sold to another bank, but the new bank, I have to say, is making a donation to the nonprofit of my choice. And of course, I picked my own because we're doing good work. And so, but I think it's important to be outspoken but respectful. Right. And unfortunately, I don't always get the respect from those that I'm dealing with, but I do my very best to be respectful and objective. But also, you've got to realize that I bring a lot of expertise and insight, and, you've got to see the value of that at some point or another.
Yeah. And you're a historian too. That's the other thing. Yes. You're not, I think a lot of people don't know
they don't know a lot about me. Yeah. But I wrote historical narrative on the migrant labor camps of Lubbock.
Yeah.
And it's the only one like it nationally. Wow. And the other great thing is, I've been working with an individual from the Southwest Collections who's working on his dissertation, and he asked to do my oral history. And the thing is, I have been mentored by some of the biggest trailblazers of this community. I've been so blessed in that capacity.
Yeah.
And part of it was because of my grandfather, who was probably my very first mentor, because my granddad, without getting emotional, but he had a very fervent work ethic, and he moved from South Texas to Lubbock to help bring a lot of migrants that were coming to this area to the Catholic Church. And he would help them. He would share food. He would help them get a job. He would help them if they needed a place to stay, that is. I mean, he was just such a sincere individual, very passionate about faith and the community.
Yeah.
And so we would have conversations. We shared the love of gardening. My grandfather had the most beautiful roses and garden in on the neighborhood, and he was my neighbor. He lived next door to my house. So he would give me a lot of insight. So at a very young age, I was learning that wisdom from someone like that.
Yeah.
And I believe that it helped me to become who I am. And then on the block behind me was my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. And they were significant in my life too. So, and then, it started. I had Davita Doro. I had Lala Cavazos, Linda De Leon. I had Richard Lopez, Ernest Spartan, Eric Strong. I mean, the list goes on and on. I've always had some of the most significant people that were making change in the community, that they saw that I was as passionate as they were. And along the way, I also had the tools of technology and the education. Yeah. So I was able to further their work. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's been a blessing, no doubt.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned those relationships, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But another thing that I loved that you mentioned, you talked about travel, and I cannot agree with you more. It is so important to get out of this country and see the world and see people and other ways of doing things, because I think that's how we learn more about ourselves. We learn more about humanity. We learn that just because an experience isn't our experience doesn't mean it's not happening. I haven't been to as many countries as you, but our daughters have all traveled abroad. And it changes the way you see the world, and it changes the way you see yourself and your role in the world, I think.
Well, it also gives you an appreciation of where you live.
Right.
Because I've traveled to third world countries and with lack of freedom. And I'm like, oh my God, I could never imagine living like this. And but then again, you also discover how people have made, living simple so attractive to outsiders, and sometimes seeing the very, very hard work. I mean, I remember traveling to Cuba. I did 2 trips to Cuba. The first one was to see the tourist
side of things.
Yes. But the next time I did an ecology trip, and man, I saw things. I saw hard workers. I saw poverty. I saw, a country that lives by communism still, but then I also saw how some people, they've learned to live through that, and they value the beauty. So they're willing to make that sacrifice. Me, I want to see beauty, but not under those terms, Yeah. Traveling is just so important. And one thing is, as a little girl, I remember, when I was in the 2nd grade, I was reading a 10th grade level. And part of it was that I read a lot. And I mean, my parents introduced us to books at a very, very young age. Yeah. And then I also watched Via Alegre, Sesame Street, and Electric Company.
Yep. Oh, yep.
And Zoom. Those were my favorite shows. And they were on the PBS station.
Yep, same. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I was learning phonics at a young age. So when I would get tested, my scores were through the roof. Yeah. And so, but I read a lot. And I remember once I had finished all these books that were my grade level, I talked to the librarian. I said, I've already read all this. What else can I read? And she introduced me to biography books. And boy, that was one of the best things that I ever did. The first book that I read was Susan B. Anthony.
Oh, nice.
And then Dolly Madison, and then Queen Elizabeth. And then it just kept going on. I started reading everything on there. So I was learning about the character traits of others.
Yeah.
And not only their traits, but also their adversities.
Yeah.
And how I could, experience these types of things by going to where they live. So seeing all these other countries, I mean, I think I told you when I was in Kazakhstan, I was on the Almaty mountain. It was the middle of June. And I remember going up and I'm like, we're going to a mountain with snow. I wasn't prepared for that, but I made it work,
Yeah.
And so I remember standing up there, and then my first thought was like, thank you, Jesus. But the second thing was, oh my gosh, I'm from the barrio. And here I am on the other side of the world, on the top of this mountain, experiencing this beauty that so many people have never even thought of, learned about, or experienced. It was one of the most surreal moments of my life.
Yeah.
And so, traveling for me is, it's part, I plan 2 major trips every year. And of course, COVID didn't help.
Yeah.
But, my daughter and my daughter is just as adventurous as I am. And so we've done a lot of mother-daughter trips, but we're already preparing for the next big experience. And I mean, we've had some great things happen. And then we've also learned how to be very protect yourself, because you can look vulnerable, especially when you don't look like the people in the community or the country that you're visiting. So
for sure.
But great experiences. And I'm so glad that I've had a chance to share it with my daughter and my husband, who eventually got the bug and finally
come on, Frank.
Because we would leave him behind. And he's like, I'm not going over there. And then once that changed, I told him, you just have to give it a shot. And once he saw everything I was seeing, he bought in.
Yeah.
And so I think awesome. That's important. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. And what I mean is, a lot of times we want to I call it the Instagram highlight reel. And we don't want to integrate those parts of ourselves that maybe went through a bumpy patch or made some decisions that weren't great or whatever. Talk about integrating all of yourself and accepting all those layered aspects of yourself.
Well, on a daily basis, I try to write a devotional. And what I do is I use my life experience of the day or conversation, maybe the day before, the week before, and I pair it with a Bible verse. And then I share a prayer. I share a little bit of, my thoughts and the connection. And sometimes it's very raw. And I have a friend who has said, I appreciate that you share those experiences, because even yesterday, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Yeah.
And I included in my publication. And I had an individual that told me, he said, I can't believe you put something like that in the paper. You make it seem like, all Hispanics are being beaten up. And I was like, that's not what it is. It's very objective information that tells you, here's what it is, here's what you should do, and here's the different types and how you shouldn't be victimized. And he didn't like it. And I thought, man, that's just crazy. So I used that, what he shared with me, pretty much to say, God doesn't like violent people. Yeah. And, unfortunately, we scar ourselves when we're doing that. But anyways, so sharing, the rawness, I think is very important. The reality of life. I'm also very private, if you can believe it or not. People don't know a lot about me.
Right.
And I have some friends, man, they share their new clothes, their new shoes, they share everything about themselves. They overshare.
Yeah. They don't have boundaries.
They have no boundaries. They lack humility. I have one friend that, I call her the one-upper. If I say something, she's got to one-up me all the time.
Oh, wow.
And, and those people exist. But for me, I like to be humble about things that I've achieved, done. I know that sounds crazy because, I'm so out there, but I like to showcase other people.
Yeah.
And, and then sometimes when I'm on Facebook or Instagram and I see people posting these things and I'm like, on one hand, I want to be proud for them. On the other hand, I'm like, man, live your real life. Just like we want to live our best life, live your real life. You don't have to share every single thing. So for me, maybe the privacy is a layer, but I think I find ways to share important stuff without oversharing.
And I think a lot of times people that do that are just looking for places to be heard and acceptance. I think sometimes, not always, but sometimes there's kind of lack of healthy relationships in our life, which segues nicely into the next thing, cultivating healthy relationships with others. You've mentioned already all these people, these amazing people that have been for you, that have lifted you up, that have taught you. You've got great support from your daughter and husband. Talk about your relationships and the importance, because those have shaped so much of who you are and what you do.
Well, I remember hearing a quote that says, behind every successful woman is a surprised man. But in my case, I have a supportive husband.
Yeah.
Frank is not only my husband, he's my best friend. He's my soulmate. I feel sorry for him because, he's so patient, but his energy, if he's going to share that with me, we're going to make things happen. And he never says no. I'll say, I want to do this event, or we need to do this, or, we can be on our last fumes because we hold this big fishing event.
Yes.
That draws, we've had as many as 5,000 people attend. And then after all that, I start organizing the equipment or I'll say, we're literally on our final fumes. And I'm like, Frank, if we go and put up this stuff in storage and go put up the trailers now, we don't have to do anything tonight or tomorrow. And there he goes. And my daughter, she makes time for this event too. And we will go. And I'm like, we're a team. The three of us are a team. My daughter, I remember used to telling, because one day I was part of a group and mother-daughter group, and they would say, oh, Tiffany and I are best friends. Ashley and I, we're best friends. How about you, Christy? And I said, no, that's my daughter.
I love that.
Best friends will stab you in the back at times and they don't care. But this is my daughter. Right now, my role is to be her mother. Yes. And later on, after she's grown up and she's on her own, then we'll be best friends. And I can tell you that my daughter and I, she's now 30 years old, we're very best friends. So
I love that. I had that same conversation with my friend Joy Drake a few episodes back, who had that same conversation with her friends about her relationship with her daughter, grown now too. And it's so important to have those, understand those and the health of that relationship and the difference. I have 3 daughters. Your daughters, when they're growing up and learning, they don't need another friend. They've got plenty of those, good, bad, or indifferent. They need you to be their parent and to be model what it looks like to be a strong, loving, passionate, compassionate, empathetic woman, and that doesn't come from being their best friend. So I love that you spoke to that.
Well, they also have to see boundaries, and they have to see, learn respect, and because then they in turn respect themselves and have that anonymity that, right here until, and once you achieve that, then we could be best friends. And that's why we travel all over the place. And I'm honest with my daughter. And I always tell her, I'm honest with you because I want you to be your best, not to hurt you. It's never to hurt you. It's to make you see what you might not be picking up on. Yeah. And because of that, we have a very good relationship. And I just did, she turned 30. Yeah. I had to do, I told my husband, I think she's acting like she's 5 years old. She wants all these parties, but but one thing, pre-COVID, my work, I was so saturated in my work that I didn't always get to do those little extra things. And I'm like, you know what? She's 30. You only turn 30 once. I had a fondue Friday with I did everything in rose gold. And then the next morning I did something, and I did something at lunch, and then I did something at dinner, and everything had a theme because I love themes and I love decorating. And then the next morning we had a sunrise breakfast, and it finally ended at dinner. And then she says, well, I'm going to head on home. And I was like, thank God.
I'm exhausted. Parties are hard work.
But it was so worth it because I made it special for her. And not that I made up, because I've always been engaged and my daughter's always been my priority, but I made it count for the moment.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of moms, we tend to not make it count because we get caught up on other things. But yeah. And like I said, best friends now, but mother first.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for that. So good. What are some practices you use to process your emotions in healthy ways? And you've spoke to a lot of things earlier, so this is probably just more of a summary of that, but talk about that.
When you say practices, I think of, lessons I've learned to be more aware. And before, I think I told you, I would immediately respond and be, not to be, confrontational, but sometimes it would come off as being territorial and whatnot. Yeah. But I've learned from my experience that I have to think before I speak. I have to choose my battles carefully, and I have to choose whether I want to even go into battle, period.
Right.
And because again, self-preservation is so important. I was talking to a friend just yesterday, and because I told her, you should run for city council. And she's like, and I was so proud of her because she's, well, I have to pray about it. And then she goes, I've been involved in this and that and that and this. And then I said, you know what? You've already answered your question.
Yeah.
And you've already done what you can. And now it's time for self-preservation. It's about, because she just retired but sometimes when you see those movers and shakers, they give so much of themselves. And I've been that person. I give so much of myself, but I've learned as I grow older to limit what I'm giving, because I have to give to me first.
Absolutely.
I've got to give to my family. And then, and like I said, once I have a grandbaby.
Yeah, absolutely. All bets are off.
Everything is. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. But
you're going to be ready when it does.
I told my daughter, I said, because I said, I'm so young. And she goes, yeah, so you don't want to be a grandmother yet. And I said, yeah, but I'm going to be a grandmother and I'm going to be so old.
What have the energy to enjoy it?
And she's like, Mommy, you can't focus. Just let things happen as they're planned by God. But, I think it's funny to reflect on such a thing.
The name of this podcast is the Feel Podcast, Finding Empowerment, Embracing Layers. Summarize for me with all we've talked about today, how you live out feel.
Oh, man, I think my actions have demonstrated how I feel. I started this nonprofit organization because I felt the need to make sure that these marginalized groups were being left out.
Yes.
I started that organization because I felt that there was a need to address the issues of family. I started Latino Lubbock magazine to make sure that we were sharing Lubbock news from a Latino perspective. Mm-hmm. I became a mother because I wanted to contribute to leading or giving an example to a child or children. I don't only have one child, but more children. And I think just always putting your actions and feelings into words. I mean, your words and action and feelings into action, because I think too often, we think about it. We know what the results can be, but we don't always let our feelings inspire us to do more. And so for me, whenever there was an issue, I mean, just like the street named after Cesar Chavez, I remember feeling marginalized and excluded and, So I put that effort to the forefront.
Yeah.
And now we have a street named after Cesar Chavez, or even the historical marker for the migrant labor camps, and learning that children died in a field because of the neglect of society and not having social services program. So there's more than just a historical narrative. It's facts and stories that we should learn and live by, because I can imagine how they felt.
Oh man. Yeah.
But I've been so blessed to have so many experiences in my life, but not all because they just landed in my lap. And God gave me the wisdom to pursue them.
Yeah.
And, and that's a feeling. That feeling of faith is one that, it makes you feel unconquerable. It makes you feel courageous. It makes you feel empowered. It makes you feel like you have a purpose and you've got to put those feelings to create destiny for others, for yourself, for your family. So, that I guess is how I put my feelings out in front of others.
All right, we're down to our rapid fire. So at the end here, as we wrap things up, name 5 activities that nourish you.
The first one is talking with others. I love to communicate. I think that's so important. I love gardening. I love spending time with my family. That includes my pets because, they're my little fur joys. I love to enjoy nature. I think it's so important. And I love to take on issues that are going to be beneficial with the results for others.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's 5.
Yep, that is. Thank you so much. All right. And then lastly, 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
I want to feel equity. I want to feel valued. I want to feel happiness all the time. I want to feel respected and regarded. That's how I want to feel.
Absolutely. I love those. All right. Well, Christy, thank you so much for your time today and this conversation. I've been so looking forward to this and so glad we finally were able to find the time to sit down together. Audience, again, go to our sources at embracinglayers.com. Go to our show notes that will be featured with the podcast as well as on our website. Follow us on at Embracing Layers. You can learn more about Los Hermanos Familia. You can learn about Latino Lubbock and all of the important things that this woman is involved in. Again, Christy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate the platform and I look forward to hearing other stories that you share.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. Have a great week, everyone.